Zimbabwe, formerly known as Rhodesia. He received his grade school education in Zimbabwe and earned his college degree in Great Britain. Post-college, Patrick traveled the world for 18 months. Upon returning home, he joined the family farm business, which specialized in tobacco and later citrus and roses. Patrick also started a haulage business. In May of 2002, Patrick and his immediate family were evicted from their home and property by violent extremists who wanted to claim properties now owned primarily by white farmers. Patrick immigrated to the United States in September of that same year and became a lawful U.S. citizen in 2008. Let's warmly welcome Patrick as he shares his story with us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Very loud. Just a fun fact. Well, not really. You know what day it is today? In history? 250 years when the Revolutionary War started. You know that? That's a big fact. So all I can say about that is screw the British. Anyway, so as Louise kindly said, my name is Patrick Hyde. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, well, in Rhodesia, really. That's so used to saying Zimbabwe. So, get a couple of bit of history on Rhodesia, and John's already done a lot of that anyway, so I don't want to hop on it too much. But Rhodesia was colonized by the British in the 1890s, and basically the Federation of Iceland was begun, where it was more of Rhodesia, Zambia, and Malawi, as it's called today, and the other two. The other two being Zambia and Malawi gained the independence in the early 60s, but Rhodesia was left out, so there was a bit of an uproar about that. So in 1965, on the 11th of November, which was the exact day that I was released from hospital when I was born, Rhodesia declared UDI, Undeclared Declaration of Independence from the Brits, which didn't go down too well. So immediate sanctions were imposed on Rhodesia. And this caused a firestorm. But it brought the country together, and we started fighting and keeping the country alive. The only friends we had was South Africa. So a lot of our exports were halted. But, as John mentioned earlier, our dollar was the same as the sterling, in fact, not even the US dollar. So it was 1-to-1 back in the day. So we thrived. As a Rhodesian nation, we thrived. And then basically in 1966, what they call the first Chimurenga was started, was the Rhodesian Bush War, when extremists who were trained by the likes of Putin, and in fact the leader of Zimbabwe today, Mnangagwa, was part of that training group that Putin trained in 1972. There's a picture of that as evidence. So Putin goes way back. Wow. We talk about communism, you talk about that, that's where it all started. So with the Rhodesian War, Russia and China got involved, and it got to a stage where Rhodesia couldn't take it any longer. They were losing too many people because it was more of a terrorist war than anything else. It wasn't a civil war. People called it a civil war. It was not a civil war. It was a war of terrorism. They killed innocent young kids, whites and all. That's what it was. So basically that started in 66 and went on until 1979, when eventually Ian Douglas Smith, who was our Prime Minister, had an agreement to hand over Rhodesia and become Zimbabwe. And Britain got involved, came in and turned it over. In 1979 became Zimbabwe Rhodesia. And then in 1980, on the 18th of April, which was yesterday, 45 years ago, Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. We flourished for a while. It wasn't bad. The infrastructure crushed a bit, but we still thrived on. We had great exports. The country was doing really well. And John said again, we were the breadbasket of Africa. We kept Africa alive, even South Africa. So basically that's what it was. So Mugabe was in there for 20 years before the S hit the fan. In 1997, there was a referendum held where Mugabe wanted to rule for life. We should have just let him anyway, because he did anyway. So there was a referendum, and the country turned against him and said, that's not going to happen. So what happened, there was an opposition party called the MDC, and they thrived, and they went against Mugabe on this referendum. But what actually happened, that all the white farmers backed the opposition leader of the MDC. And Mugabe took offense to this. And so the so-called land reform erupted. And it wasn't land reform, it was just a complete terrorist again against the white farmers. They wanted the land back. So that's when it started. So their whole goal was to terminate 4,000 white farms and hand them back to the freedom fighters. That started, and the Chambanja, which means party time for them, came. There was no rule of law for them, but there was rule of law for the white farmer. You couldn't step out of line. This is where, again, communism came in. I'm sure we get the feeling of that, what's going on in this country today. There's law for us, but not for them. So basically, that's where all that started. So going on ahead now, as Zimbabwe, and then basically, the white farmers were starting to get murdered. So 25 years ago, yesterday, the first white farmer was murdered by Robert Mugabe's regime. Okay, this caused an uproar. We were a very prominent family in our district. As the Hyde family, we owned a tobacco farm called Pemby Falls, and we knew our time was up. So with the farming community, we grew tobacco, citrus, rose, and wheat, and we had some transport business. We were soon to be targeted. Pemby Falls was added to the list of designated farms, and we knew the time was here. We were determined to fight, and we did, right to the end. We had 75 years of our family in the farm. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Land invasions began in 2000, and there were land invasions. It wasn't a reform of land. Mugabe modeled himself, and this is no lie, around Fidel Castro. That was his mentor. That's how he wanted to be. So basically, there was an incident that started us. I was in Harare at a meeting, and I got a phone call saying that this mob had arrived at our doorstep, and Susan was at the house with the kids, and we got that phone call to get back to the farm. So we rushed back, and she bravely fought off this mob, no lie, told them to get off her front porch, and they went away. Before I even get back. So kudos to her. And she had 3 kids. Well, that was 2 kids then, sorry, on here. The other one hadn't come in, Monica. There we go. So that was the incident. Again, lost for us, for them. I think I've lost everything now. Here we go. So in 2000, it started to go again. So in December of 2000, I was working in the roses plant greenhouses, and in came a police mob. Up to the hilt, AK-47s, arrested me on the spot. I had no idea what was going on. They took me in handcuffs, put me into the back of a Land Rover with no canopy on it, and paraded me through the streets of the town. So we went to the police station, they threw me in a cell, and they charged me with 12 counts of attempted murder, plus malicious injury to property. So apparently what had happened, so that we were framed. I was at the local club that night, playing sports, having a couple of beers, came back home, 10, 11 o'clock at night. Somehow they told me that I was at their squatters camp that had been squatting on our farm for the last 6 months, and that I had pulled out my shotgun and shot their cattle, and there were 12 people in their kraals that I was shooting at and then drove off. And that was an absolute lie. This is more of an intimidation than anything else. So that's what they charged me with that. We had to get lawyers involved. It cost a fortune. I was remanded in custody for 2 days. They took my passport, and eventually I was released on bail, $20,000. The court case took 3 months, and eventually saw the writing on the wall. I had my family and my friends in the courtroom. And I turned around to them, and all of them had their heads bowed. They knew what was coming. They found me guilty on all counts. So basically, we were waiting sentencing, and I was allowed to appeal the sentencing. I wasn't allowed back on the farm. So Susan, the kids, and I, we went to Harare. We stayed in the capital city because I wasn't allowed back there. And after a year of fighting, we eventually got to the Supreme Court, where we had waited the whole year for this case. We were sitting in there, and the judge walked in. We all stood up. The prosecutor walked in through the back door, who'd been prosecuting me for the last year and a half, turned around to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I drop all charges," walked out the back door.
Holy moly.
Really?
After a year and a half of absolute hell. And that's when you talk about intimidation, and all it was. It was a big sigh of relief. We allowed back onto the farm again. Got my passport back. It was one of the worst experiences our family have ever put through. And kudos to Susan for putting up with that. American girl, there we go. Strong as hell. Anyway, to cut it all short, coming down to the end, the last straw came in May the 7th, 2002. Our home was invaded. So we had the kids with us. We decided to barricade ourselves in the bedroom, and they fought their way in through the house, door by door, breaking it down. They had got into my bar, and in the bar on the back wall was this huge American flag that I managed to get on my travels around the world. And I had this big, huge American flag up in my bar. They'd ripped this off the wall. And eventually I said to Susan, "It's time to open the door, because I can't have the kids and you getting hurt." So I'm walking out there. And she said, "No, I'm coming with you." The kids were lucky enough were sleeping. Can you believe it? They were sleeping through all of this, which was cool. And then they never slept since. But anyway. And we were lucky we had our nanny that looked after the kids during the day. She was there so she could take care of them while they marched Susan and I out the front door, sat us down on the ground with fires all around, and whipped the crap out of us with the American flag and called us British pigs. That's how ignorant they are. That is disgusting. And I'll tell you what, it's going to happen here if we don't bloody be careful. Seriously. It's not a good thing. So they said to us, "Leave or die right now with an AK-47 buried in my temple." This is it. The last straw. So we decided to leave. They gave us 12 hours to pack our stuff. And luckily we managed to go to a neighbor's farm, a friend of ours, and live there for the next couple of months, 2-3 months. That was in May, June, July. We had decided now that was it. There's nowhere else we can go. We're off the farm. We got in America. Thank God that I was fortunate enough to marry an American girl. So we came, Susan and the kids came here early in July to get the kids into school in August. And I lived in Harare with my parents to say goodbye. They were off the farm as well. We lived together. And I lived at the American consulate for 2 months every day. I'd go there to do my paperwork. By the time I left and arrived in America on the 2nd of September 2002, I had a book like this. I arrived in Dallas Airport. They took me into a back room. They re-fingerprinted me. They interviewed me again. And thank God I got my green card within 3 weeks. And thank God for that as well. Exactly on the 7th of May, 2008, I became an American citizen, which is right 6 years after I was evicted. I just want to thank America. This country is a great country. Do not ever forget that. I tell you that right now. And what pisses me off even more is that there's people today, the young people today, do not know how good they have it here. Right. Seriously. And again, the murders that are going on in South Africa right now, thank God Trump is going to do something about it, and I hope he does. Because enough is enough. They talk about apartheid back in the day. This is reverse apartheid. And if Trump keeps his word, I'm going to hold him to that he needs to stop all funding to Africa right now until this is all sorted out. Anyway, sorry for getting emotional.